Hey there, welcome back. This one's going to be a little bit different. Maybe I'm going to try a little shorter videos. I'm going to call them On the Siding. Yeah, another train theme. There's a shocker. And these are just going to basically looking at single topic or single thing. So a single video or a single essay, a single website article, those kind of things. And just basically trying to get some exposure, some more information out there. Or just shooting the breeze. I'm not quite sure how this is going to roll. All I know is that they will be shorter. So anyway, I wanted to start off with an excellent article by a playwright, American playwright living in Germany called Virus of Mass Destruction. C.J. Hopkins is the gentleman's name. I didn't really know much about him until I read this article, so to do some digging, look up. He's a bit of a satirical writer. Has a website called Consent Factory that he's part of, not running the whole thing. So it's a bit of a satire type of thing, but it's also quite factual and as well as hard hitting. His points are very important, and the satire does not distract in any way, shape, or form, I feel anyway, from getting his point across. So let's give this a whirl and see how it goes. We'll call this maybe Train Tales or Reading from the Rails or something along those lines. Anyway, let's try this out and see how it goes. Virus of Mass Destruction. There comes a point in the introduction of every new official narrative when people no longer remember how it started. Or rather, they remember how it started, but not the propaganda that started it. Or rather, they remember all that, or are able to if you press them on it, but it doesn't make any difference anymore, because the official narrative has supplanted reality. You'll remember this point from the War on Terror, and specifically the occupation of Iraq. By the latter half of 2004, most Westerners had completely forgotten the propaganda that launched the invasion, and thus regarded the Iraqi resistance as terrorists, despite the fact that the United States had invaded and was occupying their country for no legitimate reason whatsoever. By that time, it was abundantly clear that there were no weapons of mass destruction, and that the USA had invaded a nation that had not attacked it, and posed no threat to it, and was perpetrating a textbook war of aggression. I don't know why I want to keep perpetuating. These facts did not matter, not in the slightest. By that time, Westerners were totally immersed in the official War on Terror narrative, which had superseded objective reality. Herd mentality had taken over. It's difficult to describe how this works. It's a state of functional disassociation. There's no dissociation? Call it that. It wasn't that people didn't know the facts or that they didn't understand the facts. They knew the Iraqis weren't terrorists. At the same time, they knew they were definitely terrorists, despite the fact that they knew they weren't. They knew there were no weapons of mass destruction, that there had never been any weapons of mass destruction, and still they were certain there were weapons of mass destruction, which would be found, although they clearly did not exist. The same thing happened in Nazi Germany. The majority of the German people were never fanatical anti-Semites like the hardcore NSDAP members. If they had been, there would have been no need for Goebbels and his monstrous propaganda machine. No, the Germans during the Nazi period, like the Americans during the War on Terror, knew that their victims posed no threat to them, and at the same time they believed exactly the opposite, and thus did not protest as their neighbors were hauled out of their homes and sent off to death camps. Camps which, in their dissociative state, simultaneously did and did not exist. What I'm describing probably sounds like psychosis, but technically speaking, it isn't. Not quite. It is not an absolute break from reality. People functioning in this state know that what they believe is not real. Nonetheless, they are forced to believe it, and do, actually, literally believe it, as impossible as I know this sounds, because the consequences of not believing it are even more frightening than the cognitive dissonance of believing a narrative they know is fiction. Disbelieving the official narrative means excommunication from normality, the loss of friends, income, status, and in many cases far worse punishments. Herd animals, in a state of panic, instinctively run towards the center of the herd. Separation from the herd makes them easy prey for pursuing predators. It's the same primal instinct operating here. It is the goal of every official narrative to generate this type of herd mentality, not in order to deceive or dupe the public, but rather to confuse and terrorize them to the point where they revert to their primal instincts and are being driven purely by existential fear. Then facts and truth no longer matter. Once an official narrative reaches this point, it is unassailable by facts and reason. It no longer needs facts to justify it. It justifies itself with its own existence. Reason cannot penetrate it. Arguing with its adherents are pointless. They know it is irrational. They simply do not care. We are reaching this point with the coronavirus narrative. It is possible that we have already reached it. Despite the fact that what we are dealing with is a virus that, yes, is clearly deadly to the old and those with medical conditions, but that is just as clearly not a deadly threat to the majority of the human species, people are cowering inside their homes as if the zombie apocalypse had finally begun. Many appear to believe that this virus is some sort of alien terrorist death flu, or weaponized virus of mass destruction that will kill you the second you breathe it in. This is not surprising at all, because, according to the official narrative, its destructive powers are nearly unlimited. Not only will it obliterate your lungs and liquidate all your other major organs and kill you with blood clots and intestinal damage, now it causes sudden strokes in young adults and possibly spontaneous prostate cancer and God knows what other medical horrors. According to all the scientists and medical experts, i.e. those that conform to the official narrative, not all the other scientists and medical experts, it is unlike any other virus that has ever existed in the history of viruses. It certainly doesn't follow the typical pattern of spreading extensively for a limited period, then rapidly dying down on its own, regardless of what measures are taken to thwart it, as this Israeli study would seem to indicate. Also, we have no immunity against it, which is why we all have to remain locked down like unruly inmates in a penitentiary until a vaccine can be concocted and forced onto every living person on Earth. Apparently, this mandatory wonder vaccine will magically render us immune to this virus against which we have no immunity, and are totally unable to develop immunity, which immunity will be certified in our mandatory immunity papers, which we will need to travel, get a job, send our kids to school, and, show the police when they stop us on the street, because we may look like we are infected. Germany, where I live, is way out in front of this. According to the Stuttgarten Zeitung, I can't even pronounce that, the federal government plans to introduce a coronavirus immunity card as part of its infection protection law, which will grant the authorities the power to round up anyone suspected to be contagious and force them into quarantine and forbid them from entering certain public places. The Malaysian authorities have dispensed with such niceties and are already arresting migrant workers and refugees in so-called COVID-19 red zones and are marching them off to God knows where. Oh, yeah, and I almost forgot. The German chemical warfare research specialists at DARPA, the U.S. military's Defense Advanced Research Project agencies, have developed a new type of fancy blood test that will identify asymptomatic carriers, i.e. people who display no symptoms whatsoever. So that will probably come in handy, especially if the white supremacists, red-brown extremists, and conspiracy theorists keep protesting the lockdown with their wives and kids. And these are just the latest additions to a list of rather dystopian examples of the brave new normal, official narrative that Global Cap is rolling out right before our very eyes, which the Off-Guardian editors have streamlined here and here, which continues on Twitter. It's all right there in black and white. They aren't hiding the totalitarianism. They don't have to, because people are begging for it. They are demanding to be locked down inside their homes, forced to wear masks, and stand 2 meters apart, for reasons that most of them no longer remember. Plastic barriers are going up everywhere. Arrows on the floor show you which way to walk. Boxes show you where to stand. Paranoid blockwarts are putting up signs threatening anyone not wearing a mask. Hysterical little fascist creeps are reporting their neighbors to the police for letting their children play with other children. Millions of people are voluntarily downloading contact tracing applications so that governments and global corporations can monitor their every movement. In Spain, they bleached an entire beach, killing everything, down to the insects, in order to protect the public from infection. The internet has become an Orwellian chorus of shrieking, sanctimonious voices bullying everyone into conformity with charts, graphs, and desperate guilt trips, few of which have much connection to reality. Corporations and governments are censoring dissent. We're approaching a level of manufactured mass hysteria and herd mentality that not even Goebbels could have imagined. Meanwhile, they're striking the most empty field hospitals, and the theatrical hospital ship is now gone, despite their attempts to inflate the COVID-19 death count as much as humanly possible. The projected hundreds of millions of deaths have not materialized, not even close, and Sweden is just fine, as is most of humanity. And, just like there were no weapons of mass destruction, there is no virus of mass destruction. What there is a new official narrative, the brave, new, paranoid, pathologized normal. Like the war on terror, it's a global narrative, a global post-ideological narrative. It's just getting started, so it isn't even yet clear how totalitarian this show will get, but given the nature of the pilot episode, I am kind of dreading the rest of the series. C.J. Hopkins, May 4th, 2020. The preceding essay is entirely the work of our in-house satirist and self-appointed political pundit, C.J. Hopkins, and does not reflect the views and opinions of the Consent Factory, its staff, or any of its agents, subsidiaries, or assigns. If, for whatever inexplicable reason, you appreciate Mr. Hopkins' work and would like to support it, please go to his Patreon page where you can contribute as little as $1 a month, or send your contribution to his PayPal account, so that maybe he'll stop coming around our offices trying to hit our staff up for money. Alternatively, you can purchase his satirical dystopian novel, Zone 23, or Volume 1 of his Consent Factory essays, or any of his subversive stage plays, which won some awards in Great Britain and Australia. If you do not appreciate Mr. Hopkins' work and would like to write him an abusive email, please feel free to contact him directly. Have a great day.